We have two very special guests today. One of them will start right away. He's very nervous, so feel, cheering him. So his name is Wojtek Lasoda. He arrived from Poland, Warsaw, and he's a Korczak researcher. For many years, he just looks very young, but he's not that young as he looks. So believe me, he has been doing a lot of research in Korczak, about Korczak, on Korczak, and he's been part of several international projects. So we met first time face-to-face, I think 2 years ago in Warsaw at the conference. There was Korczak conference in 2017, right? And I thought, well, this guy speaks English, we need to invite him, because many did not. And then I thought he doesn't only speak English, but he also can relate to Korczak in a way which I didn't know. So finally, Jerry Nussbaum, plays his magic. And Wojtek is here. Another person who I also want to introduce to you, another wonderful, more practitioner than researcher, but researcher for sure, who has been using Korczak in his classroom, Ira Pitaki, who is trained first as a lawyer, and that's a great combination, which actually Korczak never had. He never got training in law. Ira first was trained as a lawyer and then became a teacher. So the combination of being a teacher and a lawyer allowed him to start using youth courts in his school, in a small school, in public school in Pennsylvania. And you will hear what happened out of it and how wonderful it is to have a court in the school. If I say the word court and justice, does it make you feel uncomfortable? Like what's your first feeling? No, kind of. Alice?
Just like very serious feeling.
Okay. Claire?
A little bit, yeah.
A little bit. So having my Russian background, I can tell you the word court and judge makes me feel like frozen that very second I hear it. The word police makes me feel like I need to run, like away. So the idea of justice and court is clearly very different in the West by itself. But what is different in Korczak's experience and why it is different, we will hear today from Wojtek, who will speak primarily about Korczak and how the youth court worked in the school, in his orphanage, but as you can imagine, you can use it in any other setting. And then we will listen to real practical experience from Ira. And in between, as usual, you can ask questions. Feel free to get chocolates for you not, just to feel not too excited. Secret here, lots of them, new ones. And without further ado, Wojtek.
Thank you.
Yeah, and he does have handouts.
Yeah, but not now.
So no problems. Okay.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm very happy I'm here, and I can speak about Korczak. I am always happy when I can speak about Korczak. The first question is, can you hear me? Without a mic, or should I use a mic, or?
Is there a mic?
It's okay?
Yeah?
Yes, there is.
Maybe
It's okay, yeah?
try the mic and
Okay.
you'll see. It makes it clearer when...
1, 2, 3. Yes, better? Okay. So I will use it. Okay, I'd like to tell you a story about the children's court in orphans' home led by Korczak. The photo here is probably the only one photo I know and we know which illustrates the work of the children's court. Could you recognize or are you able to recognize this lady in the middle? Yeah, exactly, thank you. That's Stefania Wilczyńska, Stefa, and children around her are in the middle of work. Children's court, maybe here. Children's court is rather, should be named Court of Peers. That's closer to Polish original. Here is the source of my quotations. It's the old translation because I hadn't access to the newest, and that translation is accessible on the website of the Janusz Korczak Association of Canada. So that's the great thing. But of course you can use text in your books. That's the first. Yeah, it's better. Court of Peers, and that's the assumption and conclusion at the same time. I love this sentence because for me, that's the, you know, in 100%, that's what Korczak, or it expresses Korczak's approach. The keynote, a child is as equally a valuable human being as we are. It's not the same that children are human beings or children are as an adults. No, it's much more. This assumption we can see this assumption at the beginning of the life path of Korczak. It's the end of 19th century. But he wrote this sentence, or rather it was published in 1939, so just before the Second World War. But the sentence is not the most important. The most important was how to implement that belief in daily life with more than 100 children. That's the challenge. And they did it. They really did it. And I'd like to show you how. However, to reset, it's true. I made research. I know about Korczak really pretty much, but to reset, I don't fully understand how was it possible, because it's something like magic. Maybe it's something which would never to be explained fully. But first thing that Korczak primarily didn't work face to face. He was a director of an institution. So, yeah, sure. So his method, of course, must be like institutional methods. And that's why one day or 1 year maybe, I thought that it could be useful to show this activity as six areas of the social life in the orphan's home. And some methods were used in some areas. Information flow and some methods. About almost all of these methods you can read in How to Love a Child, the part Orphan's Home. Belongings. Positive reinforcements. Institution management, and you can see that plebiscite is bolded because I will tell you about plebiscite on Wednesday probably. And self-management and bets, and I will tell you about bets tomorrow. And finally, conflicts and court of peers. And now I like to use a metaphor. Do you like this picture? I like it very much because it's beautiful, but because it shows us two very important aspects of Korczak's approach. It was system, something like system, which was, from the one side, like something biological, something evolutional, like plants. These methods were like plants. They grew up slowly. They need to take care of them. But from the other side, it was also like mechanism, something like watch, for example, because these methods were dependent each other and intertwined. Do you remember Gilles Julien's presentation on Friday? He also used wheels like this, and he used phrase chaotic harmony. It's a very good description also Korczak's approach. Okay, so let's go to the Court of Peers. Almost all picture I am using are originally from orphans' home, or there are pictures of people in orphans' home. Okay, they are human beings. They are equal. But among them, between them, were many conflicts. How to manage it? For Korczak, Court of Peers was extremely important. If you have this book, How to Love a Child, could you imagine that the whole book counts 80 pages? And please guess how many pages counts description of the Court of Peers? Do you have an idea? Excuse me?
100?
For 80? No.
No,
80.
inside this book.
Yes, inside, yeah, that's the part of this book. The whole book, 80 pages. Court of Peace, 50 pages. Yeah, that's more than half of the whole book. And that's why Korczak wrote, if I'm devoting a disproportionate amount of space to the court, and so on, that's why. And he wrote that it may become the nucleus of emancipation, pave the way to a constitution, make unavoidable the promulgation of the Declaration of Children's Rights. And it shows us that it wasn't only a particular method in a particular institution, but that was an idea, general idea, for many purposes, for many institutions. And next, his assumption regarding the code of the Court of Peers. And once again, please guess missing words. If anyone has done something bad, it is best to what? Educate, thank you. Ask why. Mm-hmm. To forgive. Why? If it was because he did not know, he knows now. If he did it unintentionally, he will be more careful in the future. If he does something bad because he finds it hard to get used to, he will try. And that's the path, that's the way. And once again, to make it stronger, if anyone does something bad, it is best to forgive and wait until he is good. But the question is how to manage conflicts that way. It's extremely difficult. That's why he invented, in collaboration with children and other people, 109 paragraphs. 109 because between 1 and 100 they were one by one, and between 100 and 1,000 by hundreds. 100, 200, 300, and so on. From 1 to 99, there were 99 paragraphs providing for dismissal, forgiving paragraphs. of the charge or for a statement that the court did not try the case. 99 for 109. Only 10 paragraphs were punishing, but it's not true, not fully true. I'd like to give you an example. That's my example, not from the history of the orphans' home, because I'd like to show you how did it work. Please imagine the girl is Esther and the boy is David. And Esther pushed David, and David felt hurt and offended, but instead to beat her or something, he's very angry. But he's going to a bulletin board and he is writing a tiny piece of paper just with David sues Esther. That's all. That's all. This evening, educator is coming, for example, Stefania Wilczyńska, and she is taking from the bulletin board these tiny pieces of papers, and she writes it down into a special notebook. And now the next mystery. Please imagine and please guess how many these tiny pieces of papers, I mean how many cases, because each this paper is one case. How many cases were in the orphans' home per a year in 20s? Because we know we have a source about 20s of the 20th century. So how many cases per a year in the orphans' home, in the Court of Peers? 500, thank you. Who gives more? 1,000? Okay, who gives more? 2,000, yeah, thank you. Who gives more? 10,000. 10,000. You know what does it mean? It means that it was a real method, not abstraction. They really did it, yeah? It is average 200 cases per a week, average. Let's go. She, next day, she's going to them and to other conflicted persons, and she's completing testimonies, yes? What do you think? What do you think? What was the situation from your side, and sometimes also from witnesses? And next step, once a week, was a court session. But we need judges to court session rather. And that's why they chose randomly a group of judges, children, between 7 and 14. 4 or 5, because it's not clear. Also with an adult, with educator, but he or she was only a secretary without the right to vote. The decision was only, made by this group of judges. To be a judge, there was some criteria. The first is rather obvious. You cannot be accused. Yeah, it's obvious. The second, you have to be in the orphan's home more than 1 year. And the third, you have to be, I know that expression, sworn in by the parliament of the orphan's home, because there was also a parliament. 3 criteria. And what was the task? The task was to match a particular case with one of the paragraphs of the Code of the Court of Peers. Each group of judges had 50 cases, no more. So you know that cases might be more, yes? So they needed, in that case, more group of judges, just more. What is very important, all people in the orphan's home could be sued, also adults. And also, you could also sue yourself if you feel that you did something wrong and you want to express it and tell the court, okay, I did something wrong. Is it clear for you? Yeah? So, I'd like to give you an opportunity to feel like judge in the Court of Peers. Please imagine that we know from the testimonies that it's true. Esther pushed David, but a previous week, he was offensive. He hurt her by the bad language and many similar things. If so, please tell me which paragraph from only this is the most appropriate in this case. How do you think? Thank you. That was also my idea, because it's my example, so it's easy to me. Yeah? Yes, but it's only an illustration. Yes, but that was the way of thinking, of doing things. Okay, now I'd like to give you handouts, and please look through this for 3 minutes. Okay. Let's familiarize with paragraphs of the orphans of the Court of Peers. Could you give it? Thank you.
Judges, they were criterious to choose a judge, but how do you choose them? Like, did they put their name forward and said, I would like to be a judge?
No, it was, we don't know exactly. It was something randomly, but we don't know how.
Oh, okay.
Maybe by, I don't know, balls or tiny pieces of papers. We don't know.
Okay.
We know only that randomly. Yeah? Excuse me. May I announce that Sam will be here on Okay, let's go further. Have you got this idea? Yeah? Because the idea was between 1 and 99 paragraph to find the reason of conflict, not in a human being, not in a child, but somewhere external, yeah? In circumstances, in a bad mood, in a history of someone, but not in a person. And it was really amazing because yesterday we spoke with Jerry, we spoke with a young man from Rwanda. His name is Sam Mujiraneza, and he will be our presenter on Wednesday. I'm talking about him because he will tell you a story, but he has experiences of many similar way to conflict resolution. He experienced the idea not to be judged, but to be understood. And that was really amazing similarity between his experiences and the Court of Peers. But I hope we will see it on Wednesday. Let's go.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So that is an additional presentation, which would be like 10, 15 minutes. But since Jerry knows him and he is a student at UBC, we thought it would be a unique opportunity for you to meet with a person from Rwanda and ask questions and for him to talk.
It's something like a surprise for you.
Not a surprise anymore, isn't it?
Yeah, you're right. And I'd like to explain one very important difference between courts for adults and children's court. In the courts of adults, I can be, innocent for 50 years, and now I don't know, I can be sentenced to something very, very strong, very hard. It was impossible in the Court of Peers. It was impossible to be expelled, because being expelled is paragraph 1000, as you know. It was impossible because of even very hard misbehavior. Because it wasn't only a conflict resolution method, it was also educational method, yes? To give children to feel their freedom, their limits, to experience it, but at the same time to keep order, just an order. And that's why the more cases you have, the probability of being expelled was rising. For example, and that's the part of the how to love a child. Probably it was a boy, probably, but probably yes. Went to charge of using bad language. 9 times paragraph 1. 9 times. But it did not help. So, 46382. It did not help. So, 3 times 100, once 200, once 300. That's the mechanism, yeah? To push him to change his behavior. And I'd like to show you in a detailed way how that mechanism could really change behavior of children. That's the paragraph 100. That's the minimum punishment. It's really funny because could you see paragraph 800? We have no punishments, yes? And 100, it's the minimum punishment. But it's, that's the matter of complicated institution, probably. However, it's the minimum punishment, and that's all. 200. Just please do not it again. 300, not please. It's an order. 400. It's a last warning for you. Can you see it? It's rising. It's more stronger and stronger. So 500. The judgment with full name is to be published on the front page of the court gazette. So your misbehaviors will known, yes, in our society, and it's really it's something very uncomfortable. The next step, 600. Judgment be posted on the court bulletin board for 1 week and, like previously, published in the Gazette. And if you persistent wrongdoers, you can even deserve on your own personal graph or chart of your misbehaviors. What should be the next step? You know it, yes. It's a rhetorical question. But family, yeah? Because that's the moment in which being expelled is really probable. So everything what was under 600 paragraph, but the text of the judgment is sent to the family because it's fair, yes, to let them know. 800, it's really crazy for me because it's something, okay, we feel helpless. So maybe if you can do anything, maybe it helps, yeah? So you can bring no complaints, nor will the court hear any charges against him. Maybe that's the idea. And 900, very moving for me. The expelled may come back if he finds a guardian. And if so, the guardian is tried by the court for all offenses of his ward. But it's a really last step. And 1,000 to be expelled, we expel. However, after 3 months, each child had the right to apply for readmission. As you can see, it's the mechanism really without punishments, only with from subtle to strong, but push someone to change his thinking, his behavior. As we know, in the whole history of the orphans' home, I mean 30 years, because it's between 1912 and 1942. We don't know it for sure, but it's something like 4 or 5 times expelling someone. It's relatively low, yeah? And now I'd like to show you some real cases, to show you how sometimes strange was, the work of the Court of Peers. Please read it, and please think about the appropriate paragraph. An idea? Which one?
It says, does not blame A because it was an accident.
Uh-huh, okay. To do it properly, you have to know all of them. You have to know the people, their situations, their habits, their history. That's why it's also not stiff paragraphs of the adult courts. It's something fluent, flexible. So here it was paragraph 70. 70? It is, the court pardons since A has already been punished for what he did. Yes, the book is straight. Next. Yes, these photographs also are from the orphan's home. A boy climbed up a tree to show a friend that he could do it, but asked the court's judgment knowing that climbing is not allowed. That's the case I've mentioned to you, yes, to sue myself. Maybe a little advice, around 100, okay? Around 100.
This is called cheating.
Excuse me?
This is called cheating.
Paragraph 7.
Yeah, around 70, between 70 and 71.
No,
No,
it is 90. And it's very significant, I think. Yeah? Can you see it? I wanted so much, yes, I had to do it. But I know it's a crime. Okay, please punish me. It's something like that. And the next case, and it's also funny. It's around 10. Around 10. No more. Okay, let's go. It's a very, very fun and moving because the paragraph. Okay, maybe the question: What do you know about this situation? No, almost nothing. Yes, because it's an example of external using of the Court of Peers, not internal, not only in the circle of inhabitants of the orphan's home, but something between children and neighbors. So the paragraph was 3. It's a very funny paragraph. I don't know, so I can do it. And we know a very tasty anecdote about it. A boy did his math, and he really didn't know how to he was very annoyed, and he threw it out, and he said, I'll give it to this paragraph number 3, because I don't know how to do it, yes? Okay, so probably one, yes, the last one. It shows us one very important thing. Could you imagine in so-called ordinary institution that situations like this, that we know about situations like this? Probably not, yes, because it's so, yeah, I feel so ashamed. And these institutions was very transparent, as you can see. However, the paragraph, it was around 200, I mean exactly 200. Yeah. So please do it again. Yes, please do it again. And yeah, and my conclusion, final conclusion. I understood one day that it was a unique mechanism or a unique approach, because it wasn't directed towards the individuals and the past. It's not about you are guilty because in the past you did something, but it's something about circumstances and the future. How do you think? What is the reason? And what you can do with it in the future? That's why I think that's the very significant feature of this system, and that's why it was so powerful. That's all. Thank you very much.
Since we have time, let's discuss, ask questions. We have roughly 25 minutes, and then we'll have a short break before Ira will talk. I have, that means I'll give you time for questions. Here I am speaking. Teamwork. That is bad. So what I was thinking about this last one, there was a wonderful Russian educator, Makarenko, who worked with juvenile delinquents in 1920s and 30s. What he did, he had literally criminals. He had teenagers who would be brought into his institution because they committed a crime. And the idea was either put them behind the bars or to keep them in this institution. What he did, and they always knew this is what was happening, he would take their case, which would come with them, which would talk about their criminal acts, put it into the safe, and he never read it. So, you understand what I mean? The past remains in the past. The kid was never felt accountable for whatever he or she did in the previous life. Now it's today, and tomorrow is the future. And let's start from scratch. And that's what Korczak is trying to show, that we do not keep kids accountable for whatever they did, but how many teachers until today say, I remember you did it, I have it written somewhere in my diary, in my journal, I'll tell you what you did, and now you do it again, so twice, punishable. So what do you think of this aspect, about kind of forgetting the past?
But in our system, it's difficult because we are asked to keep track of everything, unfortunately. We have to. And so the kid always has his past following him, unfortunately.
But don't you think you can use that past regardless of whether you keep it or not? Or you may keep it only privately for yourself?
Well, we have to disclose it.
Oh, you have to disclose.
Yeah, we do. Like if a kid misbehaves, we have to do a report and give it to the principal.
And what happens next?
Then the principal will meet with the child and with the parents eventually, depending on the severity of the act. Or
Ira, what's happening in American schools? Do you have to keep a record of everything and then give it to the principal? I'm not sure. I don't know.
It depends, you do keep records, you find, if you're giving detention and anything, you have to schedule it. For us, we would have to schedule it, we would have to then put it through the office, schedule the time, and we would have a teacher that, that handles that. So everything is recorded, because if you're punishing, you have to, there has to be
prove,
notice,
right, yeah.
and it has to be, you know, the other thing is it provides a record that is important, because the school then will say, we have X number of times of infractions.
Uh-huh.
So it becomes important in terms to explain either behavior that affected performance, or but again, you can take the different approach where, and I'll discuss that briefly as well, because that's where you can, you know, there are different theories that go through, but you're absolutely correct. You have to keep a record, because anytime you punish, anytime you take time, anytime you give any sort of objective mark on a child, there has to be a record of how it was produced.
yeah, and in the School Act, it does say that a child should not prevent the others to learn. And
Yes.
the other thing is, because of the ministry designation where the school board receives money, there's a letter R for those who have bad behavior. And in order to get the money for that, or to get the letter for that kid, we have to have a record of it.
Okay. Ron? Yeah.
Just a couple of things. The perspective of Korczak, sorry, I can always say it
Yeah,
wrong.
Korczak.
Korczak mirrors nicely Indigenous communities who, I've been informed, saw infractions of social norms as either a problem of ignorance needing education or sickness needing treatment. So rather than having it be about the person, it was about how this community responds to the person to correct behavior. And similarly, the worst punishment was expulsion from the community. And then the other piece is around sort of that collecting information about children. And it happens in all of the government services, not just education, but health, so like social services. And I caution, because a child has a right to know what is written about them and respond to that information at a later date. But also, it's one subjective perception at one point in time. Like my family's all teachers, and they all often have kids who are excluded from school for behaviors. That child doesn't get to respond to the behavior, doesn't get to explain the behavior. It's just coded. And then later down the road, that file follows them, regardless of whether they've corrected the behavior or not. So it's always a shadow of sort of what their past poor behaviors were, rather than that future focus of where could we be now, rather than where were they.
So their reputation is spoiled forever, practically.
Depends on who reads it, right? Sometimes teachers don't have time to read the whole file, but it would also, I would say yes, but it's tainted because it's one person's perspective of what happened at that point in time, rather than an objective, looking at it from multiple different perspectives. And then they are coded as needing extra support in school, but sometimes that support isn't provided, and then they're just not welcome in school anymore.
Anyone else? Questions to Wojtek? Because I kind of, yeah.
Very quick question. You said testimony that during, after the case was posted on the bulletin board,
Yeah.
then there were a time where people would take, testimony would be taken, facts would be gathered. Who was responsible for gathering that?
This educator which collected these pieces of papers.
one question. So, in this like children's court, if someone want to be the judge, then he or she should never be accused or of anything. That means like he has to keep a like really clean record to be a judge. Is that true?
I think yes.
I think it's really hard because like everybody makes mistakes and like based on those regulations, seems like even like tiny mistake can be sued or can be charged. So it would be really hard for someone to keep a really clean like record to be a judge.
The question is for how long?
Yes, because Korczak wrote that the Court of Peers is not a justice. It's not a justice, and judges shouldn't be, but it's not obligatory to be completely clear. Yes, they could have their own, paragraphs, but in the past, it's the other understanding and using the past. It was the past. The past is closed, and now it's the new beginning. Yes, even more. I think that for me, when I was punished or accused, and I had a paragraph, and now I have, for example, the same paragraph, but in case of someone other, it's very educational for me, yes, because I can see the same situation or the same paragraph, but from the other side.
Well, maybe you can explain for how long the person to be elected as a judge should not have any
It was 1 week.
punishment.
1 week, only 1 week after the accusation,
Yeah.
or between my accusation and my being a judge. Only 1 week.
So for 1 week, no misbehavior,
Yeah.
and then these people are eligible to be elected as judges.
Yeah.
Every week, how long are they
They served as
serve on that
judges.
court?
Only for 50 cases. For it
Oh,
was
okay. Each
maybe.
time it's a different.
Yes,
group.
exactly. Oh, yes, I haven't mentioned one very important thing. So it was only for 50 cases, and the session was behind the closed doors. So there was no one, no other children, no, only 4 or 5 children and the secretary, yes?
Why is it important, you think, that it was behind the closed doors, no one else knew about it? Was it important, or it's kind of artificially pushed on them? Imposed?
I think partly why it would create some safety in that your own words can't be used against you in the future if you were accused or something. But also, then you can discuss more fully different perspectives on it without being held accountable to maybe having a harsh perspective, but your peers influence you to come to a different outcome.
And it was a matter of paragraphs, not people, yes? So people needed to be there. Not needed to be.
Can you bring up any examples when, if there were such a court in your school or your institution or anywhere, the situation would have been better, but it was not because of nothing like that? Or on the contrary, you don't see it as anything valuable? Yeah.
I went to a school that had like weekly problem solving, so sort of like court, but it was to resolve conflicts, but it could be something that affected the whole school or just 2 children or a group of children. And I think it allowed us to have more empathy for others. So if you weren't involved in the conflict, you could have empathy for the people on both sides, so that if you were involved in the conflict when it came, like you, at another time you were involved, you had that faith that people would see you with empathy and with like an open sense of fairness, rather than, because it could happen to them as well. It wasn't that, somebody makes a complaint and one child gets taken to an office and talked to, or whichever. It was very much in the open about and even sometimes hurtful things could be shared, and then it was how do we get past the hurt and make people whole again, or make people feel like they could participate in school in a safe way. And my previous public school experience was much more about if there was conflict, it was one person had to be right and one person had to be wrong. And somebody had to feel the consequences of the wrongness. And it didn't create, like, I know I didn't want to go back to school after being disciplined, or I didn't want to be friends with that child who got me in trouble. Like, it just never created a sense of moving forward. It got people stuck in, or at least for me, it got me very stuck in unfairness or injustice of an experience.
And this other school, was it a private school?
No, it was a public school. It was just a very off the grid kind of.
Yeah, yeah.
It was a rights-based school.
Progressive school.
And it was, like, parents had to fundraise every
Oh,
year to make
okay.
sure that it kept going. But it was publicly funded. It was just, it was such a small, it was 40 kids for like
So it was a
kindergarten
small.
to grade 7. So,
Kindergarten to grade 7, 40 kids all in all.
yeah.
Perfect.
So it was sort of like, we didn't have grades, we just had littles, middles, and bigs. And
Sure.
your part of the Korczak was also, as a big, your responsibility was to have a little, and then, so if they were having troubles with reading, you buddied up with them and you would teach them to read, because there was only like 2 teachers for the whole school. So it was like you had to buddy with your little and teach them how to read, because they didn't have that one-on-one attention from the teacher.
That's a great idea. Well, and I wanted to ask you about the school size. What do you think? What is the ideal school size? We all understand it cannot be ideal, but if you were in a position of power to decide, what would be a school size, you think, and why? Else?
I think the small group definitely works better, like
Better.
10, 12 kids per classroom and with like 1 or 2 teachers.
Why?
Because like everybody get enough attention, and then everybody can like freely express what he or she think about it. Because like in a really large classroom, everybody doesn't have like enough time to really discuss and talk. So I feel like definitely small group will works better.
Okay. I mean,
Well, I've experienced both because in my school there are 400 kids, grade 7 to 12. But in the past we had very small groups, and very small groups sometimes there's nothing happening because there are not enough students to share, and so it was a bit boring. But some students would say that they prefer large schools because they want to be 1 in 1,000. They don't want to be known. In my school, I know every kid, 400 kids, I know them. So, and they know me. So they don't like it sometimes because they know who. I know who they are. But some kids really enjoy being in a smaller school because they are not the kind of kids that would be welcomed in a big school, and that way they know that they are being watched somehow. So it depends on both sides. It's very difficult.
secret. How big is your school?
From from K to, well, preschool to 12, we're a
Oh, you
1,000.
have all grades
Yeah.
together?
So
Okay.
we have about 1,000, but in my campus we have 340, that's 4 grades, grade 9 to 12.
And how does it feel? What do you think?
I think we're getting too big, but then I started when the school was like 600.
Okay.
So we actually got bigger, because we also had more, we built a new building, that's when we had more capacity.
It's a public school, right?
No,
No,
it's a
no.
private
Oh, it's a
school.
private
It's a
school.
private
Okay.
school. I personally, as a teacher, would like it smaller,
Small.
just because I do see there's more learning that happens, there's more social learning that happens, I think, in a high school. Because I remember one of the things I liked about my school, it still happens, but this was one of the moments where I kind of went, I like this school, is when we had this kind of open gym one time, and I just saw grade 9, grade 10, grade 11, grade 12 all playing in a circle together. Like it's not like it's my grade against yours. So the smaller the school, you get a lot more chances for that because they have no other people to play with, I guess. But at the same time, like the usual complaints about the school is you don't offer enough things, but they don't realize that really what you learn in high school really doesn't, aside from the reading and the basic math, really doesn't really matter. It's more about teaching them about life and how to learn, and I think you just learn more stuff when it's smaller.
Sure.
So about I would say like if you had maybe like 60 a grade, that would be for a high school, which means for elementary school, maybe it's 20 per class, 3 classes type of thing.
Okay. I want to offer you this metaphor coming from one wonderful school principal. He said, I would prefer 200 in the whole school building because then I would be able to put my hand on the shoulder of each kid every day. So why do you think this is important? He was incredible and the school was really beautiful. Do you think it's important? Do you think it's necessary for a school principal know everyone and literally put a hand on the shoulder? Why? Sabrina, what do you think?
I guess to be seen, to be recognized that you're there, that you're present. I didn't necessarily feel like I wanted that from my principal. I did always feel lucky in that I...
Better sit in the office, close the door. Right?
Although she was wonderful, she was actually really great. But I felt really lucky that I had a really great connection with one of my teachers, and I felt like that was enough for me in my high school, and she really took the time. But I mean, I understand that some people.
Yeah, Claire.
I'm just reflecting. I've worked in like doing my outreach nurse practitioner work in like a big school in Strathcona, which is like 600 kids, and then in some smaller schools, Queen Alex and Britannia, which are like 150 kids, so they're tiny. And I really enjoy working in the smaller schools a lot better. It's just a more cohesive team in a lot of ways, like just because it's more possible. It's a small school, and like really connected to the families and to the kids and everyone, just our capacity to be able to do the work that we do and connect with kids and families. I felt like it was more possible, and the principals in those scenarios were really involved and, you know, knew all the kids and all the sort of situations that were going on, and our ability to support learning and to support kids and families was greater in those scenarios from what I've seen.
You know, last week when we had the students from U Hill Secondary School, and most of them, as you noticed, were originally from China, they were talking about, you heard it, yeah? They were talking about the difference in the Chinese education system and Canadian education system. And one of the things was, over there it was so rigid, conservative, hard, and working again. And in Canada it's kind of relaxed, and some of them actually said, I don't know how to fill in my spare time. Like, I would rather have more of assignments and things like this. In terms of the school principal, going back to what we were talking about, I want to ask you, when I came from Russia, in Russia, almost in every school, you would rather have what you said, Sabrina, the school principal's office, closed door, not to see the person. And when you see a school principal out in the school building, most school students and teachers prefer to go back into the rooms and hide there. When I first visited American schools, and later on, of course, had more and more of experience like that, visiting with school principals, I realized, to my big surprise originally, that when the bell rang for the break, the principal would say, sorry, I need to be out. And I was thinking to myself, wow, interesting. What is he going to do there? And what he was doing was literally greeting kids. And in elementary schools, I saw kids hugging and embracing and just whispering in the ear of the school principal. So the school principal played exactly the opposite to the Russian way role. He or she was a protector, like a safe person, a person whom they could connect to easier than with teachers. So that was kind of a revelation for me because I had a very different experience. So I'm guessing Korczak was one of those, like a safe haven for the kids, yeah.
Just what I heard from a lot of the students who experienced both the Chinese educational system and here was just the negative impact of the competitiveness of the school system. And that is sort of what drove me to go to this other school, was that needing to pit children against each other or teachers against each other for higher and higher achievement. And that to me was very damaging to even wanting to learn anything. It was like, I don't want to be compared to this child or to this child. I want to stand on my own 2 feet. And it was the competitive nature of school that my parents were like, okay, this isn't working, because I just disengaged. And it was much more of the cooperative nature of sort of learning alongside people or learning at my own pace or learning what I wanted to learn that really re-engaged me in education than that competitive posting publicly people's scores or grades or that kind of thing. So that was what struck me with the kids from the Chinese system, was just not being able to feel good about what they're learning because it was so much compared to what somebody else is learning.
I want to ask you, so far, and we will hear Ira talking about how it works today, so far, is there anything which you immediately see like catchy, which you can use in your classrooms, in institutions, in your NGOs where you work with kids? Is there anything which was kind of educational for you in terms of, I can use it, or how can you adapt it? Yes, Alice?
Yeah, I think the idea of children's court is definitely great, but I probably won't use this word. I will probably change the word, but I think let children decide, for example, on misbehavior, how to correct the misbehavior. Maybe we just have open discussion, like how to do it. I think that's definitely great, because usually now in my school, what is happening is if a child did a misbehavior, and usually it's the teacher and the principal and the parents have meeting together. We never they never really include the child in the scenario because they feel like that's too much pressure to include a child with all the adults together. That may be too much pressure for the child and too much stress for the child. So, but I think from here we learn that the child is actually really, really capable of knowing what's going on and knowing what he did wrong or what else. So yeah, definitely we need to incorporate more of children's voice in the decision making process.
Great. Who else?
I like the concept of how it looks at behavior, I guess, and interprets behavior as kind of a human experience of having maybe doing a behavior and then understanding why, and then being able that opportunity to do better. So I think that's what I like about this concept.
Remember, Korczak wrote, if an adult, he says, breaks a cup, it's okay.
Yeah.
But if a child does something like that,
Yeah.
huge fuss. So don't you think this brings it to this perception, it's okay, everyone makes mistakes, teachers as well, if not more. But as students, we're not there to say a word like, excuse me, were you really right? Or you made a mistake? Did you ever have students who would tell you you made a mistake, and what was your reaction?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, that happened, and I would explain why, and then I would have a talk with them. And, it makes me vulnerable, but sometimes it makes me think, and I'm here to learn too.
I think being vulnerable is actually a good feeling, don't you think? It makes us human. It makes us really like normal people, like we are there with them together learning at every moment. What else? What else can you take from Korczak's system so far?
The thing I find is the way it works, it preserves the child's dignity. And that's what I like about it, because when you punish a student, and the student is not even here, or if he's here, is watching all the adults deciding for him, that's stressful and that's scary at the same time. But this way, I like it. I think it's very nice.
Excellent. So with this great notion of dignity of a child, let's have a break. And we're getting here at 28 minutes.
The Shenango Valley of Pennsylvania. Closest big city is Youngstown. So we're a very small rural public school. And you would not necessarily think Sharpsville, Korczak. But the association that we have is, and I'll explain more about this card. You see an example as we move along. Years ago, probably 10 years now, every year it gets longer. I think I started saying a certain number. I was asked to participate in a book sharing project that twinned or paired a class in Israel overseas with a class with one of my language arts class. I'm a language arts teacher, to read a book about the Holocaust. And they would not, it wouldn't be an email conversation. It would be an academic dialogue based on the book and reactions and responses. And because this was in the height of the standards movement, when I first started doing this, it was very closely aligned to state standards. And what we would do was read a book, and it was a specific book that was translated into English so the students overseas could read it. It was called The Island on Bird Street, by a survivor of the Warsaw Ghetto, a person who had lived in the Warsaw Ghetto as a child during the time, and he had in fact survived. His name is Uri Orlev. It's a remarkable book, and it focuses, I'll mention as we move along, its emphasis. It has since been taken over by, it started with the a connection to the Ghetto Fighter's House, which you saw in Wojciech's slide, the Ghetto Fighter's House, Lachme Hagatot, which is the Ghetto Fighters Museum. And they underwrote the participation of the schools. And it involved maybe, I would think when I got involved with it 10 years ago, about close to 15 schools or 20 schools across the country. I was the only school in Pennsylvania. There were 6 schools in Ohio, and the organization in Ohio was the one that asked me to come in and join. Since then, I've done it every year with different grades. I've done it with 7th and 8th grades and at different levels. And something that was interesting at the beginning, it said, if you can read that, it says, the International Book Sharing Project, a program of the American Friends of the Ghetto Fighters Museum and Yad LaYeled. Yad LaYeled means Hand of the Child, which is a children's museum right next to the Ghetto Fighters House, which is a museum that's dedicated to the Ghetto Fighters resistance, and it was actually the first Holocaust museum in the world. And if you notice, there's a picture of Janusz Korczak. And my experience at the time, this was just a certificate we give at the end, and that we would print out, and at the end of the successful partnership, and I dragged it out over a year. It's not the only thing I did, but it was something that I thought was very meaningful to do. Did it for a year, and the students would receive this certificate. And I had taught stories and lessons about from that period for many, many years, and I thought I was fairly well versed. And I've come across the question that quite a few of you have experienced in your life, and this is my experience with people who are involved with Tatiana, with anybody who has done this. People will ask you, oh, you've heard of Korczak, of course. And
there's always the sense of course you add it because have you really? Because, you know, people really here haven't. And once you do, it opens up a new sense of your understanding of the lessons of this time. And it is interesting because it puts you on the spot when you say, you've heard of Korczak, of course, and you say, well, not really. And then somebody talks to you in this other language about this supremely caring, embracing individual. And it's, how could I have never heard of this person before? And I find this so common. And yet the next part of the question is people will then tell you their come to Korczak moment. They will tell you when they first learned about Korczak. So this is my first learn about Korczak moment when I was doing this, and it was the American Friends of the Ghetto Fighters House, and they no longer are the underwriters for the book sharing, which is now the International Shared Reading Program, but still the connection remains, and it's one of these it really has inspired a whole range of ideas and ways to deal with students. So, as I'm doing this project, I'd like to think of you the same way, something that Korczak said in again, the translation, when I read in translation, I'm quoting from translation, a plea on behalf of respect for the here and now for today. When I approach a child, I have two feelings, affection for what he is today and respect for what he can become. What he is today and respect for what he can become. Does anybody know what that picture is?
No?
It's an X-ray. It's a little metaphor. It's a little metaphor. Growth plate. It's a growth plate. Now, I tell you a little personal, I do have time. I will get through everything I need to get through, but I think it's very important to see where you have your connections to this remarkable person, because you will find them. You will find them, and it will be in your life. My son, when he was, he had a knee problem, jumper's knee. We didn't know it at the time, so he had an X-ray. He goes in, and he gets the X-ray from the orthopedic surgeon. The orthopedic surgeon looks at his growth plate, and that's the moment. You know, you have a boy in ninth grade. Will I grow anymore? And they will look at this, and they can tell you how much growth you have. Because as a middle school teacher, I've had kids come in who've had damages to their knee, and they say, oh, I just had an X-ray, and the orthopedist says, you know, I've got, you know, maybe 6, 7 more inches that I'm growing. Some people will say that. So you never know, unless you have an orthopedic surgeon who's X-raying you. But when you look at something, you know, everybody has this growth within them. Your assignments, your interactions with people have this possible growth within them. You have to respect what somebody is now, what they can become, because inside it's going to be different. Inside it's going to grow. And that's a terribly important thing. And I will come back to that image, because when I look at my assignments, I think there's a growth plate in my assignments and what I assign and what I ask children to do. If it can't offer them an opportunity to move, I'm wasting this time. So here is not just my Korczak moment, my come to Korczak moment, but when my life was changed. And I view this, and I'm not being dramatic, I really, probably in my mid-40s, my life changed. I was a lawyer before I was a teacher. And I do maintain my lawyer's license simply because I don't know why, just to irritate my wife, because it costs money. I take courses in the summer to take what they call CLE, Continuing Legal Education courses. And I always I always take them at the end of the school year so I can focus on them. And I do video courses. And I take courses just like you're taking a course. Sometimes I fill in, I pay the attention, pay the bills while I'm doing. They let you do half of them in person, half of them online. I scan for things on education because I figured, okay, that will help me learn. I saw one that said the school to prison pipeline. This was maybe, I don't know, 7 years ago. School to prison pipeline. I said, oh wow, this is going to be about kid law, so I can get education credit. I won't get credit, but it'll be interesting, at least something I know. Then I proceeded to have my world changed. What the school to prison pipeline is anybody aware of that, the definition, the school to prison pipeline? It's a response in the legal system to zero tolerance. Zero tolerance means when there is an infraction, regardless of the infraction, if you have exceeded your numbers of the posted amount, you have maximum penalty. It just goes regardless of what you did, zero tolerance. And because of that, students in economically disadvantaged schools and schools that mainly large urban schools, students would get discipline problems. They would get thrown out of the system right when they needed to be educated, and there they are in the prison, and that's because that's all they have. They have nothing left, so they're not educated, and the pipeline essentially kicks them out at the time they needed to be basically learning skills. So they're out of the system, and what do you do with these young kids? What do you do? Boy, girl, who are big, vigorous, and they just have been exposed to this. And the whole system was, their response at the time was they called youth courts. And I said, wow, what is a youth court? What would that be? And a youth court was essentially the answer that they were trying to do, alternate conflicts resolution, an idea to combat zero tolerance, to keep kids in school. And as I'm listening to it, I hear echoes in the back of my mind. Youth court, kids court. And I'm thinking, I've seen this before somewhere. I've seen kids manage it. And it was floating around in my head, and I'm thinking, pay attention. Put my stuff, turn the TV off, watch the screen. So I learned that some of the basic distinctions, I'm going to go through some of the distinctions of youth court and what it means. Number one, if someone breaks a rule but doesn't cause harm to himself or herself or anyone else, he or she should be punished anyway. Do you agree with that? Okay. What you would do as a practitioner, you would have little cards, yes, no, and agree, or maybe, maybe not, agree or disagree, whatever. Raise your hand if you agree. If someone breaks a rule but doesn't cause harm to himself or herself or anyone else, he or she should be punished anyway. So nobody agrees with that. If someone breaks a rule, he or she is a bad person. I heard in your response, though, you talked about when somebody was, that turned you off about the idea about people viewing you as a bad person, your reputation following you around, the stigma. We'll come back to that. I listened very closely to what you guys said. It was remarkably on point. Okay, so we still have no's. And you would be surprised. You think, you guys, because you're in a child advocacy group, I'm perhaps in a way it's preaching to the choir, you'd be surprised when you give this to kids. Yes, no. There are a lot of kids that fundamentally view fairness, and they would think, hey, if you break a rule, you deserve to be punished, because that's how they're brought up. That's the system, okay? So it's not just everybody saying, oh, we love Korczak, warm and fuzzy. Justice is punishing an offender for his or her actions. Please be honest. I mean, do you agree or yes? No. Maybe. Yeah, see, there are a lot of maybes. And what again, this is an example, and I should have this in materials. You can use this. Just print out a sheet that says yes or no and have students get in a group, and you will have more of a discussion than you think you will on these issues. You should follow the rules no matter what. How many of you think that's a no-brainer answer, regardless of what your answer is? No-brainer. Okay? No-brainer. You would again be surprised how many kids are sensitive on this, how many kids really, yes?
We have 3 color papers. We can distribute real quick and decide what is yes, what is no.
We'll get to that. I'm trying to lay a foundation for where we have a distinction.
Just
because,
for you to be
oh, sure, and then you can do that, and I would be more than happy to help you set this up. These are all activities. Besides, really, you set kids up in groups, and you will really see things. Because kids really, in middle school level, fairness is a big deal. You know, yes, ma'am.
Just about fairness. Fairness isn't something comparative, like if somebody else gets punished for the same thing. Number two that you mentioned, isn't that just because it's not even between other kids? Or just because someone makes a rule, kids will think it's not fair that you're not punished?
I'll give you an example. We had a dress code violation this year. My best student, I've had this girl for 2 years. I'm a language arts teacher. She writes like an angel. She's incisive, insightful, sensitive, analytical, warm. She doesn't bully people. She's a protector. I mean, see, you would look at this kid and you would say, amazing. Well, guess what this kid did? You know, she's a girl. She's an 8th grade girl. She violated dress code. Goes down to the office, and the punishment, there is a punishment. It's unfair to come down hard against kids that are serial offenders and then just view somebody. So you face these. And again, the answer at the office, the administrative level was, you know, you had to give detention. The girl never got detention in her life. You know, it's another issue. Keep that in mind. You're absolutely correct that there are distinctions. If someone keeps bothering you or starts arguing with you, you should go to an adult or an authority figure. That one's a pretty interesting one from kids. Yes or no, or maybe. That's a tough one. Zero tolerance school discipline causes more hurt to students than it prevents. This is the fundamental reason for youth court, at least youth court movements, to combat youth court. So anyway, in number one, the youth court answer, you'll see there's a youth court answer to all these. Specifically number two, if someone breaks a rule, he or she's a bad person. No, definite no. If what they did was wrong, they got to fix it. That's the underlying message of what's going. You should follow the rules no matter what. Well, you know, that's a tough one. Rules are there. You don't pick and choose your rules, and yet there's mitigation. You know, there's always understand mitigation. If someone keeps go to an adult authority figure right away. If you reality test with students, you will find that is a really hard thing to do, and I will show you some examples of why that's hard, and yet students know that that's important. Zero tolerance, absolute reason, no. Zero tolerance is a problem. It does cause problems. Youth court. Youth court itself is a means through which students can transform their schools, and that is true. Help students make better decisions because they're involved in them. Students learn about the role of law in society. Generally, a course like this is done through civics. It's done through, I'm a language arts teacher. From what I understand in my state, I am the only one who does it as a language arts teacher. You'll see in some of the handouts that I like to mix it with stories because you can do it that way and learn. And Korczak was a writer. He wrote short stories. Students learn about the role of law in society. My gosh, what more important can you learn? Students acquire improved literacy and thinking skills, without a doubt. Articulate, public speaking, critical thinking, note-taking, engagement, active listening. I could go on. Students improve conflict resolution skills. Okay, this is what we want. It is a work in progress, and again, this afternoon I'll give you an example of how it's a work in progress and how I am working in progress to try and improve. Because you have to improve with this. The difference, and this was something that was brought out in the wonderful presentation before and your comments when Tatiana said about the frozen response and that there's a definite response, and that the notion that you also, Bronwyn, talked about stigma, about these people being, their reputations following them, and then the way the system was, and people consistently saying, these are the rules, these are rules. There's a distinction now with youth court between punitive justice and restorative justice. Punitive means punishment, essentially. Punitive justice, restorative justice. There is nothing wrong with either. I am not going to critique either. I'm going to distinguish. Punitive is the sense of law from the books. That is the law as written. The law is written, the law is applied. If you break a rule and the rule is listed, you go to the section and you read the section and you apply it. You apply it to your best student, my student who is a teacher's dream, to my student who gives me grief and keeps me up at night. They both do the same thing. They both get the same, Punitive justice, we'll look at it a little closer. Restorative justice, that's what we're focusing more on today, the idea of making things better, changing, fixing the harm, being part of understanding what you did, taking responsibility for what you did, and being part of fixing not only the harm you did, but yourself so that you don't do it again. Or at least you think a little bit more as you break the rules continually because you're a kid. This is a very important list. I gave it to you in handouts with a little picture of I kept one packet just so I know, I will certainly give this out, but I kept this just to know the different pictures that I think are really useful in distinguishing. The finger and pointing at you, I use that for a reason. Punitive justice pointing at you, it does single you out. You stand before the court, you stand before the law, you stand in judgment and are accountable for what you did. Restorative is different. You look at the mirror there, and the mirror is more or less a reflection. You think. There is nuance. There are all sorts of consequences. There are all sorts of perhaps reasons. There's mitigations. And yet you have the finger next to you. The difference between the two. An offense in punitive, an offense is a violation against the system, state, or school. That's why you have a code. In restorative, an offense is a harm that has been done to people and the school community. It's not a violation against the system. It's a harm that's been done. That's different. Justice requires the school administrators to determine guilt, blame, and impose a punishment. Think about that. That's justice. For the restorative model, justice involves victims, offenders, and the school community members in an effort to repair what was done. It involves, in one way you could think of it as a sense of one embraces, one enforces. The offender passively accepts whatever punishment or consequence the school authorities think they deserve. Passively accept, yep, you did something wrong. You wrote on the desk, you have detention, okay, I'll go serve it on Wednesday. The offender is encouraged to take responsibility for the harm that has been done and to help figure out what he or she should do to change it, rectify it, or make it better. Do you see the difference between active and passive there? Punitive is important. You've done something, your punishment, you accept the blame, I did it, or I didn't, whatever it's been done, you've chosen, there's my punishment. The other one is I accept, I know why I did it, here's why I did it. The only thing preventing reoffense is punishment. You're afraid to be punishment. You don't want to be labeled. You don't want the stigma of being an offender, so you don't do it again. Stigma. You respond to stigma, it's negative. The offender is supported as the school offender takes active steps to prevent getting in trouble again. So that's a big difference. Offenders are pushed out of school. They're either detention or pushed out. The other idea is we need to support them as students because they matter. They matter. Okay, first of all, they're not bad people, so take that away. They're people who did something wrong, there was a harm, we need them in the community. We're a community, let's strengthen it. Accountability means accepting punishment or consequences, and under restorative, accountability means demonstrating empathy for the victim and helping to repair the harm. That's a big deal, and I think a difference with Korczak as well in restorative, the person, in order to get into our court, and I'll deal with that as we move into the court system, how we structure it, the person does not challenge that he or she did something. The person says, I did it. I did it. Under punitive, if you say you did something, it's okay. Let me look to the paragraph, let me look to the code section in the school code, this is your punishment. In the court, it's I did this. And the whole question is, why did you do this? And it's not just why, when did you do this? How did you do this? Where did you do this? who was harmed. We'll get to that as well. That's the key. That is the key functional, practical distinction that will help you do anything with this. Stigma of the offense stays with the offender. If a kid breaks the rule, he's Johnny the rule breaker. That's what it is. You know, she's Stephanie. She's always breaking those rules. The stigma of the offense is removable. He's not a bad person. He just made a bad decision. You know, so the same thing with a dog. No bad dogs, just bad trainers. It's just this stigma is removable. There's no sense of stigma. The stigma, the problem is what was done, the harm. Let's fix it. You can fix harm. Questions asked, what laws have been broken, who did it, what punishments in the books. Questions asked, who's been hurt, what are their needs, who should fix what went wrong, and the $1,000,000 question, how can we prevent it from happening again, because that's where we're building, you know, not just how to love a child, how to build a child, how to strengthen a person. You know, because these people are going to be our society. You know, growth, we don't know what they're going to be, just assume they're going to be something, because they already are something. So this is your fundamental distinction. These are our terms. You know, you lay down the rules that we discuss. And these are your principles of restorative justice. And this, again, is an important thing to know, that crime causes harm. It's not a crime, it causes harm. That's the problem. Offenders break the rules, but the harm caused by the rule breaking is more important than the actual rule breaking itself. Justice should focus on repairing the harm, repair the harm, and prevent it from happening. Don't create more harm by punishing the person who did it. You're just being part of the same cycle. People affected by the hurtful behavior should be involved in its resolution, and this includes everybody in a whole list. That's why you got to figure out who was affected by it, because if you don't figure out who's affected by it, incomplete solution, and perhaps it happens again, and you also haven't fixed it. And it's the responsibility of the community to build peace. You can't just put a book there and say, hey, that's us. That's our rules. We have an active, consistent, growing responsibility to maintain order. And it's like, as you discussed Korczak's hundreds of cases with kids, you have this opportunity to maintain order, because every day it's going to be challenged. And every day you're creating leaders in your hallways. You know, that's a possibility. Leaders, followers, bystanders, all that stuff, you've got it. And you have the ability to help determine what is walking down your halls. That's an incredible, awesome responsibility. But it's there. Restorative justice, I made this just because I thought it was kind of cute, and I think it gives you the ability to make little situations, and you can say restorative versus punitive. Determination of guilt is punitive, innocence not at issue or de-emphasized. Violation or not legal or rules-based. Accountability, empathy for the victim. You know, you just go role models versus a stigma. Do you want role models or do you want to stigmatize? Keep looking at this in terms of you're creating role models. You have the opportunity with each time you do this to create a role model or just enforce a stigma if that's what was necessary. Prevention means modification. Punishment, you know, is going to avoid the recurrence. That's punitive. And punishment very rarely avoids it, and because it creates this lingering sense of a memory that you'll never forget. Impact on all students versus the individual. Strengthen your community. You know, every opportunity you should strengthen your community. So we'll go back to Korczak. So does this mean that everything should be allowed? The warm and fuzzy Korczak embrace. Come sit on my lap and I will just, this will be a fuzzy moment. Never, this is Korczak. Never, not on your life. By prohibiting things, we are coaxing the will in the direction of self-control and self-denial. We also encourage inventiveness so a child can operate within a limited space. Provide boundaries. That's what a responsible adult does. There's tremendous growth within the boundaries. Again, think back to the slide, the growth. Take an x-ray. Those are the boundaries. You can grow beyond. It's not determined, but there are boundaries. There are boundaries, and rules are important, but you have to understand that there's an inventiveness and a spirit of imagination with the reality of what you have. You can take a matchbox, maybe 10 of them, and create a story from them. It's a simple thing. All right. The idea, if you read, have you had a chance to look at some of his literature, Korczak's children's stories?
Mentioned it.
Wonderful.
I didn't read it.
Wonderful. This is in the dedication, and this basically says, so this is why you should have restorative youth court. This is a difficult book. I dedicate it to all the restless children, those who find it hard to change and improve. You have to want to change very much, very deeply. You need to strengthen your willpower. You need to play a useful role in life. Life is strange and mysterious. Life is an extraordinary dream. Whoever has the will and the power and strong desire to serve others, his life will be like a beautiful dream. Even the path to his goal was difficult. Even if the path to his goal was difficult and his thoughts were restless. I dedicate it to all those who find it hard to change and improve. There you go. I mean, this is what's necessary. You know, this is saying this is where we need it. I just want to make sure if we've loaded the correct presentation. I mean, I can adjust, but I'm not sure. I think you might have put a different one on. But
This is Voyager's, right?
yeah. Well, no, this is mine, but I think
I think all three are.
is there a way that I can see the title? Then I will know, because there are some additions that I did want to make sure were available. How would you do that? If it says for Vancouver, then it's the right one. Is it the one for Vancouver?
I think so. Sorry, that's not the correct mouse. That's for this. Is this the one we're looking at?
If it's the one that says Vancouver, then we're perfect. Because I had highlighted some things that didn't show up, and I'm wondering why they wouldn't show up. Yeah, where would the title be?
Sorry, I just opened it back up.
Okay, but as long as it says Vancouver, we're perfect. Yeah, okay, good. I was just curious because, okay, I use the same, yeah, these are very common. The court is not justice, but it should strive for justice. It's not justice, and we learned that justice is an interesting, people might have a different idea of whether you determine, is it fairness? Is it something more? Is it equity? It should work towards what seems to be right and fair.
Hi, we were talking about the word justice, and I think Bronwyn came up with the idea, which I like very much, that kids do not use the word justice or just, but they use the word fair. And they say, that's fair, that's not fair. And that's, yeah.
It is a middle school, that is the thing. They have a strong internal sense of what's fair.
Yeah.
They know what's right, and I'll mention that they know what's the right thing to do, but in their core, they know what's fair.
Yeah.
They don't always act on what's fair because it's always filtered through their own experience, but they deeply know what's fair. There's a story, The Lottery. Are any of you familiar with The Lottery by Shirley Jackson? There's a key signature moment. That's not fair. That's not. Do you remember when Tess runs through and she says, "That's not." I don't teach the story, but it's a powerful story, and I always think about the fair. She says, "That's not fair. That's not fair." She went through the whole thing, and right at the end, when the stones start hitting her, what does she say? Key distinction, and you brought up. That's not right. That's what she says, and it's not translated, so this is in English, so the words, that's the difference. That's not fair. The whole story, she says, it's not fair, it's not fair, that's not fair. But then when the stones start hitting her, wait a minute, that's not right. So if you haven't read that, it's worth reading. But the court is not justice, because it's not, but it should work towards it. We're not perfect, but we're going to do our best because our goal is forgiveness, really, because that's what we want. There are some activities that I do to try and get kids to think. This is the key distinction when you want to have a court or something. Some of you said you would like to have something like this. You have to train kids not only to make decisions, but to understand how they make decisions. One of these works. This is a great one. You and your classmates have just crash landed on a desert island and everyone is safe. Nobody inhabits the island, but a neighboring island may be inhabited. They may not be friendly. Kids like that kind of crap. But then you give them the teacher stuff, right? You know, because all of them think, oh, lost. What do you need to survive? You say, okay, I want you get them together in groups and you have them answer these questions. This is not something, you don't show them your goal. That's your goal. You have them do this. When they share at the end, give them 10, 15 minutes. When they share, you make sure they write a lot. You know, make sure they think a lot. Make sure they discuss. Then you say, the key things is, will you have a leader? How do you decide who the leader is? And what will the leader's responsibilities be? You will find, it's very interesting, the distance and distinctions you come up with, which is really helpful in a youth court situation, why it's civics. It's often taught in civics is because you get a definition between autocratic, democratic, and participatory senses of a government. Autocratic, one leader, one decisive leader who makes decisions regardless. Democratic, people vote on stuff. And they'll vote for representation, participate, everybody, they have groups. And you'll see, and then you put them on the board, say, oh, look what you've done. And then they learn how they're making decisions. And they will find that some people think, well, some of these don't work. Because they also have to deal with property, but they have to deal with threat. And there's also this notion of building an army. You know, and there's all the things, because some people then become the enforcer. I mean, really, it's sort of an interesting thing when you learn about kids, because to just automatically say we're going to have a court, you're going to be the bailiff, you're going to be the judge, you're going to be the advocate, and you're going to, take notes. You'll find that we'll get to that point. And in discussing, again, I go back every time I have a question with anything, this is where this stuff changed my life. I always go back to Korczak and I try and understand. I go back to some of his works, King Matt I, a wonderful, a remarkable book, very depressing. But in discussing the reforms that this kid wanted to do, because this kid is trying to reshape the government in the way he wants to reshape a government. Every kid in your class wants to reshape. You ask a kid first day of school, they'll want to reshape it. This is my version of school. That's true, Felix, but be patient. You can see for yourself that kings can't do things all at once. Kings have to obey the law. What is the law? I don't really know myself. A bunch of books or something. So this is what you do. You show the kids the law. There's a local community that can be very helpful. Your bar community, local bar. Lawyers will love to get involved with this stuff because I'm sure they can use it as pro bono, and it's a big deal. We went to the Mercer County Courthouse, which is a wonderful courthouse. Not like the one you have in Vancouver that looks beautiful and modern. This is intimidating and severe and stern, and this is justice with the balance, the scales, and the sword. I mean, this is everything. And what kind of a sense of justice do you think this shows? What is this? We have two forms, punitive, restorative. This is punitive in its pure, this is the criminal law. We went before a criminal judge in the Court of Common Pleas in Mercer County, Pennsylvania. Excellent judge. Tatiana, your response is absolutely the response that you have in a courtroom. You freeze. It is the power of law. It is the sword. You have the fairness, but you have the power of law. It's all about enforcement. You're afraid right away. You tighten up. It's like, even any smart aleck you have in class is not a smart aleck in a court. I mean, they could mouth off anywhere, but not in a court. And no sense of humor. Well, I'll show you a little bit of a sense of humor in a second. This is what it looks like. So you see these big, ponderous, massive paintings. And you have my kids that were learning. You have, look how terrified he looks. And he's sitting before, look, I wish you could see this. I took him on a field trip, and the judge was wonderful. I mean, I didn't say, please be stern. I said, just show, I'd like the kids to have it. What they did was they did some of my simulations where they had a case, and we'll talk about some of the cases that were just like what you said, where the kids had to act on a simulation. They had to write an opening statement for a student. And I had maybe 6 or 7 groups read their statements in court to know what it would be like to read in court. And the judge did what a judge did. He had a bailiff. And if you notice on your right-hand side, there's the bailiff, the one who moves the person along. And you notice that student, this is maybe 3 or 4 years ago, student, big kid, no sound. They move along and they say, may it please the court. They say, and there he is reading to the jury. And that I'll break down the roles of what we have in our jury. And look at this still, the faces. It was like, this is great. Thank you, Judge. So the kids actually are, and then the judge then came out afterwards to talk about how he dispenses justice. Can somebody tell me about how he dispenses justice? What do you see? It's hard to see. With intellect, dispassionately? Absolutely. What do you see in the first slide that's closest to you and not in the slide that's closest to me? Or what's in the one closest to me? Yeah, it's a bat. It's a bat. He said that if the bailiff is not available and the bailiff is not there, that is his last line of defense that he holds behind him. Not humorous. It wasn't humor. But it was severe, it was stern, and he is he is a judge with distinct, with integrity. He's a great judge.
Was he playing
No.
character?
No, but he's very dramatic.
Oh,
Theater is drama. If any of you are teachers and you deal with drama, the court itself, if you talk to any lawyer, a court itself is just orchestrated drama with a lot of anxiety and intensity, but orchestrated drama. And I just sat in the back taking pictures, and he was not really happy that I was taking pictures, but this is it. So,
but he's out of his...
he came down to talk to the students. Oh, because he's a nice guy.
Yeah, but at least he made the distance less.
Well, because then he could hit you with the bat. But that's punitive. That's the sword that justice carries to enforce. That's punitive, and there's nothing wrong. That's our system. We have law, we have equity. You never want to argue a case in equity because that's fairness, and that's like a loser's argument. Law is the one that has the penalties, the recovery, it has the teeth, it has the bat, it has the sword, it has the robes, it has authority. But this is not Korczakian, and this is not a youth court. This is the contrast. This is how every distinction you make, and throughout the year and throughout everything, I give the kids, this is your distinction. You have to have a line of contrast to show what you are. You don't define yourself by what you're not, but you need a starting point. That ain't it. And again, afterwards, let me give you a little, you take a group on a field trip. Anybody understand, anybody get the little game here? What does this mean? Famous attributed quote to Napoleon, that when you take kids anywhere in their middle school, you feed them, because an army marches on its belly. So, and we took them to a buffet place, and they proceeded to do the, not the 7-year, the 8th grade locust on the buffet. But it was great. And it was wonderful. And this year, I'm more to that thing that I'll be able to do this again. So here, another distinction. I try to keep it literary as well. If any of you are high school or middle school language arts teachers, O. Henry is often in the curriculum, and the story A Retrieved Reformation is about the beginning of the story. I put a copy of the story in your materials, and I put in a restorative versus punitive activity that I use with it. After this, the story is a person is set up before a judge, before the warden in the prison, and the warden says basically, hey, I'm getting you out. You're lucky to get out, but you're so bad, I know you're going to do it again. And the guy says, warden, I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't do it in the first place. And then the whole story, then all of a sudden he goes out, and then magically all these safes are cracked, and there's crime spree for about a year. Then he goes to a new place, and he falls in love. Love changes him, falls in love. He opens up a shoe store. Instead of robbing the place, he falls in love with the bank manager's, the bank owner's daughter, and becomes a respectable man. And he's about ready to give up his safe cracking tools because he's marrying the girl. Totally changed his life. And in the background, there's a detective that's following his trails. And he is about ready to give it up. Instead of, he has a luggage container full of all his best safe cracking materials. He's taking them to the train, and then they find out that the new safe that the bank put in, unfortunately, his 2 nieces were locked in it. And it wouldn't open until, I don't know, a couple of days, and there was no air. Nothing could be done. So what does he do? What could he do? He could crack the safe, but what does he risk? What? Yeah, because he's showing that he's not Ralph Spencer shoe salesman. He's showing that he's actually a very skilled safe cracker. I mean, so what he does is he just opens up the bag, walks over, says, "Excuse me," cracks the safe, looks up, sees the detective looking through the rails. The detective looks at him. And the guy says, you finally caught me. Yeah, well, okay, guess that's it. And the detective, in the story at the end, what do you think the detective says? Punitive justice. What does a detective do? Why? He broke a lot of rules, right? You arrest him. Restorative. I don't know, it's not so easy. I have the kids deal with that. But, in the story, what happens is the detective, what do you think the detective does? The detective is really annoyed. Yes, ma'am?
I'm just guessing. Like maybe the detective just walk away because he just did what he had to do.
Good guess. The detective, although, what does a detective have to do? The detective can't sit there under punitive justice, right? The detective can't pick and choose the rules that he follows. That's for a jury, right? That's a determination that's done by somebody. He has his authority. And yet in the story, the super detective says, I don't believe we've ever met, sir. And he walks out. It's a wonderful story, but you can do all sorts of things based on what I do originally is I do, as a language arts teacher, you do conflict, person versus person, person versus self, person versus society, and you go through the whole thing, and that satisfies your standards. But in terms of a youth court, this is a great opportunity to explore the distinctions between restorative and punitive justice, because everybody has a job they have to do. You're accountable, but the detective is accountable. So that's again another interesting one. Everybody makes mistakes. It's a good idea to give someone a second chance. Isn't that the greatest lesson for school? You're not a you're not a stigma. You're not a rule breaker. You're forgiven. You got another chance. You got make it better. He did make it better. There was actually a case, I was trying to find it within the last couple of weeks, where somebody did something heroic, and I can't find it in the news yet, and he had an outstanding warrant that the DA, if anybody remembers that, you can bring that up, because I'll find that when I go home. I just can't access the computer, but that came up, and it actually was dismissed. You remember, he did not, the person chose to not bring charges against him. Yeah, and it's wonderful because then again, every time you show something that's a real world thing, that's where a defender, somebody will make a decision, either the defender or the prosecutor. So next, this I think is great. I love these activities where I can build something. I gave them to you. They're 3-part. It's called the button list, de-escalation, and obstacles and challenges. First, I have kids that break them up into a group, and I have them brainstorm and write down the things that push their buttons. And I tell you, you write anything. What really blanks you off in school? What blanks you off? What really pushes your buttons? And then they write them all out, and in the middle there, I think there's a square, rank your top 3. But fill the sides, rank your top 3. Next, when they're done with that, I give them a long time to do that, then I have them de-escalate. What do you do? How could you deal with this? How can you de-escalate? How can you lower the volume? How can you lower the intensity on this? And let them sit there and write. And I've done this for a few years. I have And I keep all this stuff. I actually have them in the suitcase. I have all the responses because I want reality. I need to know reality because I can't manufacture reality. That's coming from me. Then, and you will be surprised. If you just do buttons and de-escalation, you're going to find my kids know everything. They know how to de-escalate. They know all the answers. They know the right things to say. They know the right stuff, and they give you the answers you want to see. You say, wow, these kids know it. Boom, give them the third one. What are the obstacles and challenges to your ideas and solutions? Then you're going to get the real world. Well, I can't do that because the teacher, number one, I'm going to have to sit with this person anyway. Number two, I'm in 3 classes with this person. Number 5, it never works that way. Number 6, my reputation is going to be done. I'm not going to tell on somebody. They'll go through a whole list of things that are better, and these are the obstacles because what this is what's going to work against you having a successful resolution of harm or reparation of harm. Because if you don't deal with the obstacles, you'll never repair the harm because you won't build the skills and the mechanisms to stop it from recurring. Because if you ignore this, you've ignored a key aspect of it. You can't rush developing a court. Then we go through the children. This is important again, go back to Korczak. A child knows his environment. She can sense kindness. She detects deceit. She's able to read a face in the same way a farmer reads the sky to forecast the weather. This is because she, too, has been observing and investigating things for many years. They see all, they watch all. Now, of course, it's filtered through their experience. That's why I have a lot of kids. These are the problems with kids and what they observe and what they respond. And I was talking about this with my wife yesterday. Ask a kid, what'd you do in school today? Nothing. What'd you learn today in school? What do they say? Nothing. They've had all sorts of stuff. There are reasons why they say nothing. That nothing is coded with layers of, well, I learned that I'm still considered useless. I learned that Mr. Smith is really a jerk and is unfair. I learned that, I might like Gene. I learned that whatever, and I'm not going to talk to you about it. There's all sorts of things that's in that head. Everything is in that head. Can I just ask what's on the list? Can I just say nothing? That's the reality. So how do you teach a kid to question? Because if you don't teach a kid to question and question the person in front of them or a group to question, you're going to be patting yourself on the back that you have a great youth court, but you're not going to solve anything because kids are just reading a list. I go back to, again, literature, Rudyard Kipling, From the Elephant's Child, a really good short story. I keep 6 honest serving men. They taught me all I knew. Their names are what and where and how and why and who. Those are your standard, what they call the journalist questions. And again, to keep it root-based in literature, go back to Kipling. And it goes back to Greek, but it also, this is current for us. And then as you go into the questioning, remember again, the court is not truth. That's another one from Korczak, but its goal is truth. It's not truth, but you go for it. You aim high because you're going to miss a little better if you don't aim low. So what do I do with questioning? I bring in, I brought in for this group, I brought in a local attorney. This woman works with the superior courts, and she came in and she worked with helping kids to ask good, incisive questions. It's a wonderful thing. But you want to be careful. Never surrender your role as a teacher to a presenter. Because unless you know what they're going to present, because maybe the kids have seen it before, and if they've seen something before, here's the response. Oh, yeah, all right, whatever. So you don't want that because this is the key moment. And what she showed was a video the kids had seen before. And that was a problem. It was, if you've not seen it, it's you give the kids a puzzle. You give them a basketball, and you say, okay, there's so many kids, and they're going to pass the ball around. How many of you have seen this one? Raise your hand if you've seen it. Count how many times the kids pass the basketball. Right? And they're all going to count. And then at the end, somebody will raise their hand, they say, how many of you saw the gorilla leave the room? And it just shows they focus on one thing and whatever. But it's great. It's a fantastic thing, but it loses all its appeal when you have, little Steve in the back who goes, yeah, there's a gorilla. So be careful. You don't want a gotcha moment in class. You don't want gotcha moments. You want real questions. You want things that really you can go to. No gimmicks. She was great, though. I mean, really, really good. But again, be careful. What kind of questions you want to do? How do you want to show them? And think, would this make me ask other questions? Another thing I did, and it's in your materials, I created these scenarios that were built on kids' responses. I gave you 2 scenarios. And in law school, we used to do simulations where we would negotiate. You get a packet. Stuff you know, stuff you don't know is given to somebody else, and you negotiate and you try and come to something. Right? So what I did was in the packet, you have the full materials. It'll have what's known about the kid and what's the private life. And what I did was I had older students really get familiar with the detail. And then I broke the kids up into groups, and they questioned that student. They went through the series of questionings about what the student did wrong, and they went through the questions that you'll have. So what do you think I was looking for there? Now, bear in mind, with the Middle School Confidential, the only one who read that was the person who played the role of the person who did something wrong. So you would be in a group. I'd have 1, 2, 3, 4. You're in a group. I stand before you. I did something wrong. You're going to start asking me questions. You're going to go through your list. You'll know what is the first case scenario? What does it say? Could you read it? Just in the box.
Student mouths off to a language arts teacher when teacher is collecting homework, swears under breath, gets defiant, and charges out of room. Classroom.
Yeah. Kid. So you're going to ask these questions, right? People will ask the questions, and the student will come in. I had a student play the role. I had maybe 2 students do it, and I had different groups. And then at the end, we got around and we asked this to the person who was like me, if you asked me the questions. They would respond, but I would write what shut you down, what opened you up, what needed work, and when the kids come up with a solution, what did you think about it? Did you feel valued, or were you heard? Of all the things I've given you, or I'm going to give you or talk about, this is this and the button, push a button, this is so essential because you find out something real. Guess what I found out? What are some things you think that the person would say about his peers or her peers questioning her? What do you think would be the what shut you down, what opened you up, what needed work? Yeah, excellent. That's this like basically right out of the manual would say close and, but something more. What a middle school kid would say.
You asked me how I saw it versus assumed how it went.
Okay, well you're really being intellectual about this. I mean, these are kids that are ruled by they're ruled by hormones, So they're gonna respond. Let me give you, at the risk of time, number one that showed up on almost all the kids that played the role was tone. They did not like the tone of the questioner. Number 2, this showed up on all. These are important because my wife's a social psychologist. She takes data, whatever. I assemble as much data as I can. This is the best I can do. I have a lab. Like Korczak had his orphanage's lab. This is my lab. Eye contact. You don't look at my eyes, you're disrespecting me. Tone, eye contact. Those are 2 things you can teach a kid anyway. Now, culturally, some people will not lock eyes with you. But in terms of, you've got to understand where it's coming from. But in that case, tone, eye contact. Another one, the person it seemed like they didn't listen to the opening statement, what was presented about the case. They weren't listening. Didn't listen. Eye contact, tone, didn't listen. In the manuals that I deal with, and I'm consistently trying to understand what I can do and what I can't do, and asking advice, people say, yes, you can ask personal questions. Because this is done, it's purely confidential. And there are other distinctions with Korczak. This is purely confidential. You can't ask personal questions. One of the other ones that came up with it was somebody laughed when he asked some questions about my family. Now, you're in a small school, people know about families. So, look, you got to do it. But I'm telling you, those are reality. They come up. If kids say it, and over time, that's your responsibility. You've got to find what's real, because you're just going to come up with, you're going to do stuff that pats you on the back and you think, wow, I'm great. But if it's not real, it's not going to do anything. Authentic, You can fix tone, eye contact. You can fix, whether they take it or whether they listen. So
Sorry, do they bring up body language?
they said, again, I view that almost with looking down, body language. Yeah, they say, and it's less, it's more visceral. It's like, I didn't like the tone. He didn't look at me. He was smiling when he asked about my family. I said that 5 times already. Because then they're not listening. And you'll see as we go through it, what they actually, what they do. So those are clear. And look, if you're teaching a kid to have eye contact, proper tone, listen, you're giving them skills that they're going to need anyway. This is, again, tomorrow I talk about the postcards because there's a hybrid thing that I do in my court, which is, again, connection to Korczak, which is one of the reasons why I did, because it wasn't just the court. He did, when I went to the museum, the Ghetto Fighter's house, I bought they had a selection of facsimile of postcards. And it said in the facsimile and the video accompanying the facsimile, the DVD, that he gave cards as encouragement to kids when they did something. Now, I understand full well that he had a system and that they were also distributed in the court as well. And they had a certain allocation and there were certain symbolic distributions. But originally, you look at this and you say, wow, what a great concept. Give a kid a token. And that's what Korczak said as well. These are tokens. Some kids are souvenirs. They might remember them. They might matter. They might forget them on life's journey. But, he would give them. And so that's something that we do. And I make every session of the court that I tried to establish is always giving of cards first. And it's announced. And another thing with the name of Korczak, I transliterate Korczak. I put it Korchuk, and I separate it so the kids, they'll go Korczak, and they read it, so but they're just mouthing, and they understand this is a legacy. It's something they're doing is not just, hey, this is something. This has a history, and its history is connected to powerless children at a time when children were vulnerable and in threat and suffered. And this gave them a voice. And that's your job as a teacher, responsibility and legacy. And you're responsible to the legacy. So we have there's a bigger video of the actual court that I have them do where they swear in. There's a form, and I gave you a script. You could actually build a court based on it. It has the players, it has the participants, but I'm trying to give you the reason and why it matters. This is one of my, this is something, again, from Korczak. Again, whenever I think why it matters, I go back to Korczak. Youth advocate questioning. This is the person who and this is connected to the person who stands with the person who did something wrong to present their case. This is what Korczak said. A teacher who, instead of forcing, emancipate, who does not pull but raises up, does not oppress but molds, does not dictate but instructs, does not demand but asks, is destined to live through many inspired moments together with the child, and will frequently be able to observe through a veil of tears the struggle between good and evil forces, and to watch the white angel walk off with the trump card. Wow. But substitute teacher with peers. And that's what you're doing. Because at every proceeding that we've done, I've been at them, and I would love to have said a million things like, why not ask that, why not ask that, but I don't, because it's not my proceeding. It's not my game. It's not my show. Now, this is something important that I do want to make sure that I get to read it. This was one of my students who years ago was an advocate in a simulation. And she's actually helped this year in the actual running of the court. And I asked her for feedback when she was questioning respondent, and this is what she said. When I was questioning the respondent, there were a few things I had to keep in mind. This person isn't a bad person. I don't know what is happening in his or her life right now. I have to make the person comfortable in a tough situation. A struggle for me was making the person feel comfortable with answering the questions, but once I started to get the hang of it, it was easier to follow up her questions with relations to my life to help her understand that we've all been there. That's an 8th grade girl. That's an 8th grade girl. And There's something else towards the end of the materials, you can see where she reflected and she makes some other comments on this. These are the jury deliberations. Again, going back to Korczak, the people that not only question the person who did something wrong, these are the person that come up with what the template for fixing it, what we call a disposition. You're the delegates, he said. Until now, I was all alone. I wanted to make life good for everyone. But it's very hard for one person to know what everybody needs. It'll be easier for you. Some of you know what the cities need. Some of you know what the countryside needs. The little children know what the little children need. And the big children know what the big children need. I hope that someday children from all over the world will meet together the way the kings did recently. And all the children will present their own special needs. You have a whole group of people who are familiar. Use the resources the kids have. That's important. Again, I had other deliberations, and this is what I called it. The Sharpsville Korczak Youth Court. Now, again, the goals of when they come up with a decision, and not a decision, because again, bless you, the kids you don't determine guilt or innocence. In order to be you did it. The court does not determine. That's a difference, again, between perhaps Korczak's court of peers and this. There's no question of guilt or innocence. You did it. The whole reason is, why did you do it? How can it become, how can we not do it again? Who did you hurt? Fix it. So some of the things that we came up with that were really important, and this was through practice, is obviously use the resources in your school as parts of the disposition. You come up with things like, we have some things in our school currently. Some of you mentioned big and little. Our principal established a house system in our school based on sort of like Harry Potter, where there were 4 historical houses from people in our small community, and kids were grouped into and selected like the hat into each of these 4 houses. And they have a big, they have a little, they have a family, and that's a way of her including everybody. And anybody interested in that, she would be more than happy to share it. It's remarkable. It's our 3rd year of doing it, and it's powerful. But we have to seed it. It has to work. So part of every disposition, we have to make sure that the kid knows who his family members are. Is he a big, little, and this has taken more root. Another one, we have kids that we require them to make goal sheets at the beginning. All schools do that, whatever, make their goals. As part of every disposition, we have them take one goal that they wrote down and show 2 weeks progress on it. They don't have to solve it, they don't have to fulfill it, just some progress. Then we also have them figure out, is there a teacher? Part of the questioning involves, is there a teacher you have a good association with? Do you have a good relationship with it? And somebody said that that the kids don't feel like there's anybody. We try to have, our principal again also establish this thing where at the beginning of the year and we revisit it, we want to make sure that every kid has at least one adult advocate. We ask them to write, who would you bring an adult? Who would you trust? Or which teacher? It could be staff, it could be custodial, it could be lunchroom, it could be teacher. That is remarkable. That is, you will find the kids who don't have an adult, they don't mark one, those are the kids who need one. And you keep it confidential, but you better get and find an advocate for that kid. I used that list to help myself. I really did. I used it in a court with one kid who mentioned that he trusted me, and he was actually our first case. And he mentioned that I was his advocate, or that he would trust me because I like to make art, I like to do art, and this kid, he was in there because he did dirty pictures. And use your talent for good. But anyway, I used that, and it was a wonderful thing because that was information that was part of what our school already, again, it was within our x-ray, it was our growth. It was initiative that I'm not clashing with the school initiative. I'm enhancing or using what people have already determined was important. Student-directed goals, an advocate, our house system. My principal also has yoga meditation for a thing. There are all sorts of things that we have, and we try and incorporate things, and I think those are the best. The problem is, here's the problem again in practice. You end up writing the disposition. If you put in must have, then you've written it. The kids don't do it. So you focus on what's clear. Number one, if they're obviously, as an adult, you notice that there's a guidance issue, a family issue, you have to include guidance. Just tick it off. Number two, you have to have them revisit a goal. Beyond that point, everything else is probably available to you. Revisit a goal. Let them self-reflect. I think another important thing is the apology. you'll find the kids. That's another thing. You think it's important. Did they apologize? Did they? If your court system is late and doesn't work, time has passed. But sometimes kids can't do a written apology. They'll do a verbal. Don't assign essays. That's the biggest mistake. People say, write an essay about this, research this. Use the initiatives in your school. Incorporate other teachers and say, what are you trying to do? What do you like? Can a teacher be shadowed? Can you do something? You enhance it. That's when I say that this can change the culture and climate of your school. This can change the culture and climate of your school because you're respecting decisions other people have made. This has been very helpful for me. Number one, the reason why I'm here today is because of the man on the right, on your right. He does a one-act, one-person play about Korczak. He takes on the persona of Korczak, takes 10 matchboxes, and he does a wonderful play. My wife had us see this maybe 3 years ago in Pittsburgh, and afterwards I talked to the performer, and I said, he had made the comment that he actually does a youth court. And there you see in the circle, for some reason, he just pulled me up and said, you sit in the court. And I thought it was funny. And I said, at the end of the performance, I said, yeah, put me in the court. We actually do have a court. And he had said, I've just done this performance. I believe he said in front of a surviving orphan from the orphanage in Canada. And I said, well, I would like you to tell him that a school in Sharpsville, Pennsylvania, without any Jews in it, without anybody who knows really anything about it, is basically does the lessons, learns the legacy, and respects the legacy of Korczak almost every day. And I think after that, when he traveled around, I ended up getting a call from Tatiana to say, and that was last summer. And then I went to a conference here last summer, and it was wonderful. Jerry Nussbaum, I met all these people, and I saw your production. It was wonderful, and that's how. So this is an important, I think this is about as Korczakian as it gets. You don't stop playing because you grow old. You grow old when you stop playing.
He looks much better than here with the makeup on. This guy, I'm a guy, and I tried to bring him here for this summer institute. He was actually in March in the U.S., I believe, yeah? And it was impossible to bring him here for summer, but maybe at some point.
I will bring him here now.
Okay.
I'll bring him here now because he actually came to my school in March. And he came to the school in March. The same group that brought him to Classrooms Without Borders, brought him to Pittsburgh, called me up and said, hey, you want to, I know you do this book sharing project. Do you want him to come to your school? We'll make it happen. And I said, okay, of course I want him to come to my school. So I invited the other schools in my book sharing consortium. So the 2 other Ohio schools came, and he. Your graduates as well. Oh yeah, and I'll show you that towards the end. The people from the years, I brought the kids down from the high school that came. So it was really remarkable. A whole group of people that would have no connection to Korczak, and just speaking the language. So anyway. As we move along, the second part was the postcards. These are photos of his real postcards that had left the orphanage. And on the back, they're what they were given. I had a translation of some. They were for tasks and for things the kids did, for saying prayers, for getting up early, for being clean. And then I had done some projects with postcards over the years. That will be the subject tomorrow. The actual postcards and how you can use them. And they're great. I've used them over years. I've used them for maybe 8 and I've changed them. I've used them in literature. I've used them for all sorts of stuff. It's wonderful. But this is connected specifically to the court. Under the 6 pillars of character, respect, citizenship, responsibility, trustworthiness, caring, and fairness, if I notice, and this is still teacher or staff directed, when we notice a kid does something, this is not just, hey, the kid sharpened a pencil. Or whatever. When a kid does something remarkable, I give it to the teachers, they circle it, and they would write what the kid did. They don't have to do a lot. It's very easy. And teachers will tell you, don't give me work. I don't want to give anybody work. I'll do the work myself. I will simplify it. So there's not much work. Just describe briefly what a kid did, circle it, and at the beginning of every proceeding, before the case is heard, the bailiff announces the postcard recipients for the Korczak. And this is a blown up version of the card. And I told you the island on Bird Street. One year I had the kids, they didn't know they were doing it, but I had them draw pictures for every chapter as they were doing it and then write stuff. So I have graphic novels of this story. It's wonderful. This was one of my great artists who wrote this in the quote, "The unknown person side, each child is the hope for the future," just like that x-ray. And on the back, you should have this. This is for what they've done. And the cards themselves, I do award them, or they're awarded by the kids. And I want to see if I've got an example, the actual cards. Tatiana, I think you.
No, I think they're in your luggage.
No, I think you earned a card. I think you were, yeah, if not. Oh, here we go. These are the actual cards. And we don't give a lot. I mean, for a positive reinforcement model in feedback in a middle school, I just don't give a lot. It's when somebody does something under the radar, and then I give them this letter, and the letter describes Korczak and what it means. And I've had people and adults come to me after and say, oh my gosh, and this is in your materials. I gave this to you. It's a powerful letter of what Korczak did and what this card means. And what you did honors the community and makes it better, so that there's always a sense of positive and good as you hear somebody try and be good. You have a model right in front of you. And it's a wonderful, powerful thing. I mean, I had a wrestling coach come over to me and say, "Hey, I got this card from Chris, and this was great." Because I had the kids give cards for something, for whatever, a chosen adult. So this is what the card looks like. You are an inspired example of the 6 pillars of character. Your actions make our school and community a better place. Now, I'll show you my plans for this summer. I'm going to make a whole variety out of cards that I've got now from a whole crop of things that they did for each pillar, for each virtue: citizenship, fairness, caring, respond. I'll make one specific, that the kids did. I'm not making them. The kids made them. This is where they awarded the cards in a first simulation. This was a simulation because it's confidential. I can't, do somebody's court. This is the cards I'll show you from a couple of years ago when they went to their partners in Israel. I brought the cards over. I was on a trip to deal with some of the schools that I work with. And this, I went to one of my partner schools, and they hand-delivered the cards I'll show you tomorrow. So where do we grow from here? What's that picture again? Growth plate. So there's more growth. Where do we go? As I said, 10 matchboxes. I'll bring you Amichai Pardo. He came, we brought, and it's, again, Classrooms Without Borders. He came to the school. And I'll be honest with you, not every kid in my school has been in my class. So, not everybody knows Korczak. So we had, we had as many kids as we could fit because he wanted a certain number of people, plus we invited the Ohio schools. We felt it was important. They did work for the book sharing project. We wanted them to have a community outreach, and it's a wonderful play. He actually becomes Korczak. Amichai Pardo. Pardo, P-A-R-D-O, and he does a one-man show. He's been doing it for years. He's actually wonderful.
Professional actor in Tel Aviv.
Yeah, and he does another show too. I think he does Ben Gurion. Yeah, but that's for a higher level. It's a different level. But if you notice, he walks around. He pretends to be Korczak, and the kids that I've had over the years came back. It wasn't just my 8th grade and 7th grade. I had a current 7th grade and 8th grade, and I had 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th graders who had been through my class and who had done book sharing. I had tons. My principal's daughter was involved with the book sharing. So there he is. He does it, and these pictures were in the local newspaper because she wanted the newspaper guy was in for something else, and he said, "You have this guy, I want to take pictures of it." So this was him dressing the kids up for the court. He has them in the court session. They act out what they're doing. I mean, this is pretty good. These are kids. These are not my students. These are kids from an Ohio school, and it's fun having a mixture of different kids. And this is the organization that helped sponsor and underwrite Classrooms Without Borders. And my wife showed me, I'm not on Facebook because I'm a teacher, and that's just a minefield of horror. So she showed me, we gave her, because not only did she enable Pardo to come, that same night when I met her, And that same night, years ago, she said, hey, we're doing this other program called The Children of Wilson Lane, which is about the kinder transport, where we give a free book to every school, 10,000 books, and it's about the kinder transport. And she said, you want to do it? I said, again, yeah, why not? Why wouldn't I? So I had my kids do that program, and they've done different cards with that program, and I really thought she was an advocate for children. So she was determined at the next proceeding, because the kids love the play so much, they awarded her a postcard, and she put that up on the site, on her site. I mean, she really was honored by it. She understood. You know, I didn't ask her to do that. I didn't, you know, again, it's like what Korczak said. Let me see if I have his actual quote. I travel with everything because to me this is all, it's all connected with everything. As I said, you know, you don't take a change in life lightly. He said, the farewell card, one of the cards was a farewell card with forget-me-not, is not a reward but a souvenir of remembrance. Some will lose it on life's road. Others will treasure it forever. Guess what this woman from Classrooms Without Borders will do? She will treasure it because, you know, school, it's a deep honor to be associated with anything of Janusz Korczak. And this was the article in the paper. History takes center stage. It was a really nice article. And at the Jewish Federation of Youngstown sent a representative. They also paid for Pardo to come as well, and they presented us with this big portrait a picture of Korczak to my school. And I'll show you where we're going to hang that. That's another a visible, tangible legacy of Korczak. And it's powerful, but I marked this on purpose. After the play was over, a group of students from Sharpsville Student Court spoke briefly to the audience and presented Pardo with a postcard made by the students. Pardo said that this was a first for him. Now, this guy's been doing this all over the world for years. Two sophomores, Keely Steiner and Lauren McConaughey. Lauren was the girl who did that. Were in the 8th grade when the school first performed its student court. With about a dozen students serving as a jury and protagonist advisor, school administrators refer cases to last month the court took on about 3 cases. Steiner said, instead of determining guilt, the court helps the student determine why he or she did something, what kind of harm it may have caused, and what can be done to avoid repeating the offense. After the court has reached the decision, there's a 2-week follow-up. Quote, we have a youth advocate who works with the student and checks in with them, she said. I think this is something that everyone should see, because for him to come up with these ideas and for us to be still talking about them in 2019 is crazy. I mean, not only are they talking about it, these are kids who I asked them to come back and watch, because they're sophomores and coming down to our land is little land. So they come down, and this is something that's become part of their life. They've taken it on as a legacy of power and something important that matters.
Ira, if I can stop you
Yeah.
there, because my suggestion is we have a very short, for them to be able to talk and say how they feel, and then we have a lunch break, and then
Sure.
start. Okay? So, can we stop right there?
Can I make sure, if you give me like 60 seconds, I'll see if I get through. This is what the court looks like. Number 1, where do we go from here? And this was connected. This year, my principal gave this letter. I put this in there that she established this as our disciplinary program for the year that we just had. I can talk to you about whether or not that worked. This year we have something more realistic. She's actually letting me teach a course. So I have, in addition to my courses, all my language arts courses, I get to teach a course on youth court that the kids are mandated to show up to. I don't have to do it after school or before school. Attendance was the hardest thing for kids who just couldn't make the proceeding. So if they go there, I can train them in questioning. That's big. Number 2, this is something that the nurse just put up. The portrait is going to hang in a room in our school that's called the restorative room, but they already said we employ a youth court restorative justice model of discipline, And that's where Korczak's going to be, where kids heal themselves, strengthen themselves, make themselves better, and reflect. And that's where the portrait will be. That's what's in our pipeline. And this is very problematic quote. Community goodwill. What a mighty force, from Korczak. Does anybody know where that was from? I'm sure you do know. Look at the date. It was in the ghetto. This was him noticing kids playing a game with flies for bathroom privileges and actually treating each other with dignity, kindness, and saying, oh, if I don't have enough flies to do a number 2 there, I'll give you X number of flies. Can I just go and you catch me? Yeah. And he just looked and said that basically even in the worst times, kids still know what's right and they act on what's right.
3 weeks before the extermination.
And that is a goodwill. What a mighty force. This is what knowing full what would happen. And I do have, I can, if the video shows, I have a current student who was my advocate, and there was another student who was in my other course that their words, and that's it. And again, I gave you a massive packet. I would be more than happy to, explain anything or help you with anything about it. It's a journey that it's worth taking. Thank you. And I'm sorry if I took too much time, but it's a lot of stuff.
You did a great job, thank you. I couldn't imagine anything better, thank you.
Well,
Yeah.
it's a work in progress.
It is, but it's great, absolutely. So, Wojtek, do you want to come here? We will use like 15 minutes. Are you okay with that? Just asking questions or responding the way you want to respond, if you have any response.
Somebody's talking.
That's probably from here, no?
Yeah.
Yeah, she's actually talking. I think that's the audio.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Yeah, that's Korczak in action, yeah. So.
You learned from me.
So.
She's a woman. I must speak.
Yeah, so that's so true. I wanted to add one thing which I thought I would keep to when you speak about postcards, but I think it's so really powerful. The Korczak orphanage kids, the boys who survived, many of them, out of anything they preserved and saved during the Holocaust, during the war, were those postcards they received in the orphanage. Just put yourself in the shoes of somebody who is saving the belongings, which are most important, most treacherous, during the war, or trying to escape from Nazis. All they saved, among very few things, were those postcards. How important was that? Like literally, the most important thing. Yeah. So anyways, thanks a lot. If you have any questions, observations you want to share right away, please do so. Anything which burns from inside and will put you on fire if you don't say it, go ahead. Alyssa, you want to say something? No? No? Okay.
Just processing.
Yes, Judith, please.
Maybe just started with the theories of justice, punitive or restorative. And are there any of the kids relate to what's more fair, the punitive or the restorative kind of justice? Is it an internal thing with kids to be?
It's, what's interesting about what you say? You want to know how they're going to respond to punitive and restorative, and do they feel it inside, or is it something? Here's some interesting things that you get when you get groups. When you have kids arguing with and somebody yelling, that's punitive. And whether or not they're right, who cares? Because they're arguing about something, they're trying to make sense of a concept
And
in
they
their own
use
terms.
their legal language.
And yeah, my previous superintendent would say, if I walk past your classroom and you're not using a grade appropriate vocabulary, and it's like, that's one of those things. Always be aware that the vocabulary and the vocabulary they use matters. And do they understand that there's a distinction between them? They do, but again, I think the biggest problem that you have is saying, I'm going to roll it. And my principal, I think the biggest problem she had was saying everything has to be restorative this year. You can't do that. You have to train kids to ask questions. Because again, garbage in, garbage out. Quality in, something useful out. Do they understand? The biggest distinction is understanding the difference between punitive and restorative, because they have such different aims. And you don't minimize punitive. It matters. I mean, the society matters. That's the society you live in. You're not preparing them for real world. But if you want to change and make a just community, if you want to manage, like Wojciech says, in the hundreds of kids every day, I was listening to that, and when a kid says, and somebody brought that up, you have kids, how do you become blameless? He who is blameless, who are you going to find who's blameless to be a judge? And yet, if you establish the kids wanting to be a judge, then you've established they know that they've got to be good for at least a week, maybe 2 weeks. And you have more leaders in your halls, more people trying to be better. So you can't really quantify that. It's just part of it. And if they internalize it, it's the same thing between punitive and restorative. You give them a better vocabulary they can use in life. And sometimes you just say, detention, my principal now is saying this year she's doing away completely with detention. She just finds it the most useless waste of time. But again, there's so much pushback from teachers who view it as an important use of a distinction. And yet, I mean, you have to I think the responsibility is saying, do kids know fair? Do they know what's right? Again, they'll sit there and put it through their own filter as well. I can't really do that, or, well, I see why that's the case. So I think it's important, again, to use things like a court to show them, to have stories, to at least, I mean, my kids are young. And if you look into my future, what I would love to do, part of what I'm going to do this summer is I've been asked to take the script and make it user-friendly for middle school, which I'm going to do already. I took the questioning. The questioning you have in color, that's mine based on questioning's not working. Kids just not understanding the words they say. So when kids don't understand the words they say, that's a problem. If they get the spirit, that's an opportunity. So yeah, I mean, that's what you want to do. You want to give them those two and consistently show, is that punitive, is that restorative? But you don't want to stigmatize both of them because they both matter. You don't want to say punitive is only bad. It's something is different. You have an objective of why you want to do it. Always having why you want to do something and match it with your school's goals, and you're protected. And then you can make a lot of progress if you use what's current in your school because you respect what's there. Don't disrespect punitive. It matters. Don't over, you could over inflate restorative. Again, like Korczak said, I'm not saying everything's allowed and you have to let every kid have every urge indulged. So I hope that answers in some way, but I don't think it did. I apologize. It's a mass in my head.
Do you ever get pushback from communities or parents saying, because I used to get, please don't tell my kid about their rights, it'll just get thrown in my face, or things like that. Do you get pushback from people?
Well, it's still being put. We've had a year. We've had cases. This year it's going to be more a course. And I've had a parent call me specifically and say, hey, what the heck is going on? He didn't use that language. He said, I had one of his kids currently and another case, because one of them was presented, she was determined that the principal said she could do this. And he said, and he was really confrontational with me about it. Why? It's like, is she going to be judged by her peers? And then to me, it was a teachable moment. I was like, great. I said, okay, I'm glad you're calling. By the way, so this is what it means. And it was good, because once you explain it, and once you know the distinctions, it's like content. Once you know your content, you can do its variations. But if you don't know the content and you don't know the distinctions, you're going to sit there and say, well, this is our new form of justice, our new form of discipline, because the detention doesn't work. But if you say, this is what we hope to achieve by it, that's different. This is why we're doing it, because we think it's going to build character. This is going to help her be more accountable for what she did, and know, we're not saying, she's only in it because she admitted she did this, and we don't want to punish her. We want to build her. We want her to be a leader. Who's going to argue with that? Of course, parents argue, but you know, you just, the more educated you are, and again, that goes back to your question. If you educate what the terms mean, then you understand, you know, what their implications are, and for me as a practitioner, how they work in the real world. What are your obstacles? As a lawyer, I guess that's where my training came in, is what are the obstacles to my, you know, how I view something.
I have two things. One is a question. The first one, which I prepared, but I will give it to you maybe on Wednesday. We have a book which is now in the publishing house and which should be out of print this year. And Iris, practically all the handouts which you got will be there. And that's a book about Korczak with many chapters. Wojtek has a chapter there. So that would be one step up front to talk about Korczak and show how to use his ideas. But what I want, and that's point number 2, what I want to suggest, and I hope you will support me in this, Ira should write. And it's not fair that you keep it to yourself only and to your school and to the teachers in the school. You should write about it and it should be published, because I think, would you agree with me? Try not to. I think it's seriously very, very important for teachers in America or Canada know about it, because that's something which, as you said, who is Korczak? What about Korczak? Who heard about Korczak? But that's really connecting Korczak from 1942 and legendary person who died with his children. Yes, that's true, but that's not the Korczak we want to keep. The Korczak we want to keep is exactly a different person. That is the ideas and legacy we want to grow on. We want to really build upon. And that's where ideas like this and practices should not stay only with a small school in Pennsylvania. It should be known. And my dream, you know, Martin Luther King said, I have a dream. I also have a dream. And my dream is to have a number of Korczak materials based on Korczak's ideas and philosophy published and being available for teachers, because if teachers don't learn, if teacher trainees don't learn, then there's no hope. Schools will remain the way they are. And I think this is one of the things we should do. So, and one last thing I wanted to say, Julien, who you heard last week, and you heard him at the conference, a social pediatrician from Montreal. When we spoke behind the scenes, he said he has a book which was published in French, but now he has a translation in English, and I also want him to publish it in English. So the idea is how a pediatrician should interpret the language of the body of the child. So I'm thinking this whole thing about how a teacher can interpret the body language, which again corresponds with Korczak's ideas and legacy, and that's why I was asking about the body language. I think it's so very important to notice all those small things as a teacher, right? So if that book comes out, Julien's book, and that's from the point of view of a pediatrician to translate the language of the child. But how to interpret the language of a student or a child in the family, judging by the body language, I think this could be one more step, and think of that as well, and as a psychologist as well. Yeah, so I'm thinking we can start really adding on, and that would help to humanize the pedagogy and the school's experience.
Could I make a quick comment about using the stuff that you have?
Yeah.
Wojciech, last year I attended his conference, and he made, he's going to be probably, have you talked about it yet?
No,
Okay, listen to everything he says, because in discuss specifically with what he did with the court as well, but he discussed something and put them in your toolbox, you know, because something he brought up at the conference, I used at a tough moment with a difficult child. And it was incredibly helpful, and it was useful, and the kid consistently asked me about it, and we did it, but it was something specifically from what you said. So always be open to these moments where you can have your life changed, you know, because you never know when it's going to change. And you know, it becomes a really powerful force, not for you, but for the people you impact. It's your students. So if you're teachers, and if you don't think that you have a responsibility to your students, you know, think again about what you're doing, because you are a part of their landscape, and everything that you hear, you can use bits and pieces of it to do a better job. You know, because your job is to have a positive interaction. And one of it, you know, there's a school that's doing, a very, very large school district in Philadelphia is using the youth courts, and they have 2 teachers doing it. They have this mechanism. They're one of the very few that's doing it, and they say something like, we do it to build relationships. And that's wonderful, because they do the relationships between the teachers and the students, and that's what it builds. So think about where it can help you, and where it can help your school, and where it can help your students, and then customize it. And I gave you a big packet of like the things that I think work, and you can contact me at any time, because just say that you were here, and I would be happy to either direct you to somebody with a better answer, or give you my ideas of how I used something. You know, I'd be more than, because, I mean, why else are we here to not just share ideas for ourselves? The idea is to share them to our constituents, you know, or our students. You know, really, for me, it's sharing with the students, or people that share with me to help me become a better me. You know, like Tatiana, I can't imagine, you know, this has become such a part of my life,
As a
simply
nightmare,
because
my name is like a nightmare.
No.
No, Tatiana called.
No, but then again, I wish in your life that you have a hero. I wish in your life that you have a real hero or role model. Mine, as I said, I need to say that. I always say it's my dad and Thurgood Marshall, who was a justice of the American Supreme Court, and I always think, how would they decide in things? And my moral compass, you know, is always Korczak. I come back when I have a question and something about what I want to do with a kid. I look back and think, where's there something? And I always find some kernel, a bit of practical, because he really had patience for no adult, but all the patience for children. And you know, if you don't use that expertise or that fundamental sensibility, then you're missing out on something. And I feel like, I always think, well, what would he think about this? How would he handle this? And you know, you try and you do what you can. And that's why when some of the things you brought up, there are little bits and pieces that he did. Why reinvent the wheel? Just, you know, put more air in it.